Hi everyone, before I get stuck into the talk proper, I just want to explain the QR codes that are up on the screen here on your left. That first QR code will take you to an education profile page for me. Ignore the opening rhetoric. Click on, there's about 4 tabs on there, and on that they will open up. And under those tabs, you'll find lots of different strategies that I've tried over the last few years that I've found that have been really effective for my teaching. It doesn't really matter what you're teaching and in what context you're teaching, online or in person. There's quite a few tips in there that at the very least should give you some inspiration for some of your own approaches in your own teaching. The second QR code that's up on the screen there will take you to some free resources. The main landing page there is for a graphic novel, Understanding Animal Behaviour. And in addition to that, there are links to various YouTube videos of lectures from the field, all of which are centered around teaching animal behaviour to undergraduate students. I'll show these QR codes again at the end of the talk. So just to put myself into context, I'm a behavioural ecologist. I'm particularly interested in natural selection and sexual selection and the role animal behaviour has in how animals, their phenotypes adapt to changing environmental constraints and variables. I do a lot of stuff on animal communication. For example, up on the screen here we have the wonderful Southeast Asian Draco lizards that use these large throat fans or dewlaps to communicate territorial ownership. But I also study amphibious blennies, again, primarily in the context of natural selection, why animals move from different habitats into a new habitat. But I also study these animals in the context of sexual selection as well. So the picture that you've got on the screen here, you'll see the largest individual in there is a male. He's got a wonderful crest on the top of his head and he's surrounded by various females there. So the reason why relevant if you're interested in ecology, or if you're interested in evolution, or if you're interested in conservation, you really need to be understanding how animals behave. So I was expecting to find lots of data to really support the notion that animal behaviour or behavioural ecology or ethology, whatever you want to call it, is going really, really strong. I've got some conference attendance here at the American Animal Behaviour Society annual meeting. You'll see that it has been progressively increasing, but it's plateaued in the last decade or so. Our 3 kind of premier journals in animal behaviour, the journal, behavioural ecology and social biology, you'll see that in the last few years, the total number of publications that are coming out in these 3 premier journals in our discipline has been progressively dropping off again in the last decade. I'm not going to make a lot of fuss about this data. I was expecting to see something else, so it's quite interesting to see, at least in the context of what I've got on the screen here. I believe it's still going strong, but there is some cause there to think, where are you going to get our next generation of animal behaviourists or behavioural ecologists or ethologists? Now, I would argue that, at least in my case, and I feel like in many instances, the first taste that people have of animal behaviour is when they take an undergraduate animal behaviour course. This was certainly the case for myself. I took a 3rd-year animal behaviour course in Macquarie, and I was essentially flabbergasted to discover that, animal behaviour was a thing, and you could actually study animal behaviour from a scientific perspective. So it really opened up my eyes. Before this course, I was your typical buckets of gloves ecologist. I was interested in conservation biology, and I was also starting to get interested in adaptation and evolution. And when I took this course, I suddenly realised that my real interests lie in animal behaviour, because it's the behaviour of animals that determines the types of selection pressures and the ecology of that animal as well. So it seemed to be, again, at that nexus. So it seemed to be highly relevant. So if you're lucky enough to get into an academic position, you get recruited, and you get recruited based on your research skills and your publications, and then the university shuffles you into your education role with virtually no training whatsoever. It's really kind of bizarre. So at UNSW, I teach into various undergraduate courses across all years, from first through to third year. We team teach at UNSW. There's a main coordinator, and then there are two other academics, at least two other academics that you're teaching with. So it works out quite nicely. The enrolment of these courses ranges from small courses of 40 or so up to very large courses of 800 for those gen ed courses. A lot of it is that traditional face-to-face instruction, but as I'm sure many of you, if you're an educator in the university sector, appreciate, is that a lot of our stuff is moving online as a consequence of changing expectation of students, but also just the improvements in technology, I suppose, as well. So at UNSW, my bread and butter course is this animal behaviour course. It's a third year elective course. It's moderate size, ranged about 60 to 80 students. And this is where a lot of my energy goes when I'm teaching. So, I think in the context of teaching animal behaviour, we do really well in terms of practicals. It's very active learning, it's very hands-on, and it's animal behaviour, so the students really engage with it. But for me, I feel like the primary challenges that we face in our teaching, and I guess this is regardless of what topic you're teaching, is in the delivery of content through this, kind of traditional lecture model, regardless of whether it's in person or online, and also delivering content through readings, for example, through a textbook. So I'll address each of these two kind of chestnuts of education in just a moment. But to put it into context of the animal behaviour course that I teach into, I've been teaching it for over a decade now. So at UNSW, we have obviously student evaluations, and they come out after the course is completed, and it's on a 6-point scale. So if all of your students strongly agree that they're satisfied with the course, you'll get a 6. If all of your students agree that they're satisfied with the course, you'll get a 5. And so all the expectation really is that you should be hovering around about that 5 benchmark. For the first few years, the course was just hovering above 5 naturally, and there's a bit of up and down there. And in hindsight, I kind of feel like at the time I was thinking it's just because it's a great course, it's great teaching, but really I think the satisfaction of students in this course was based purely on the fact that the topic was animal behaviour. Students really get into that topic. So I don't think there was anything special in the teaching at all. And you can also see that there's this progressive decline in student satisfaction in the last few years to plummet to an all-time low in 2017. Teaching here was very traditional in-person lectures with a textbook at that time, and in-person practicals as well. So clearly by 2017 things were changing. The status quo was not acceptable anymore. There was changing expectations from students as well. So I think, the other kind of obvious thing that I noticed in the first few years is that when I first started teaching in 2011, it would be routine that I'd be walking into a lecture hall with at least 2/3 of the course sitting in there for the majority of the term. By the time kind of 2015 rolled around and onwards, I was lucky to get at least 1/3 of the class turning up to those lectures. So there's been this progressive disengagement of students from at least the lecture content of education or instruction delivery. It wasn't just my course. I could see it my colleagues as well, and it's systemic across the higher education sector in general. There is this progressive disengagement of students they simply don't turn up to lecture. It doesn't matter whether you record the lectures or not, you'll still see the same pattern of drop-off. So I bet the bullet on reflection of those satisfaction scores in 2017 and started to really reflect and change things in the course Content was essentially the same through the entire period. Nothing really changed other than the way I approached my teaching. There was a transition period where we first flipped the lectures to be online, to be more flexible, and then progressively moved to a fully online asynchronous mode of instruction for the last few years. And you can see that the student satisfaction scores have risen back up, converging on 6 and been relatively stable in the last few years as well. Well above the benchmarks of the Faculty of Science and UNSW more generally. This is the last information I'm going to give to you on student satisfaction. Everything else is going to be hard data on actual learning outcomes. So you might have seen in the last few years, there's a lot of buzz about this, disengagement. There was kind of peaked with this article in the Chronicle of Higher Education, a stunning level of student disengagement. Professors are reporting record numbers of students checked out, stressed out, and unsure of their future. A lot of this was all directed at the consequences of COVID and the hangover of COVID. And this sort of stuff got a lot of traction. A lot of people were talking about it. It was featured in the New Yorker, all sorts of things. But I have to say, I don't buy this notion that it's a COVID thing. As I just mentioned, I was seeing progressive disengagement of students from my course. That was a popular course from one year to the next, way before COVID hit. That progressive decline in lecture attendance is a clear example of exactly that. So I don't think it's a COVID thing, and I don't think it's, whether you're doing in-person teaching or whether you're doing it fully online. This disengagement of the students is across the university sector, and it's progressively getting worse. So who is your typical undergraduate student, but who is the typical undergraduate student who is taking an animal behaviour course? This is where I think the next generation of behavioural ecologists are coming from these undergraduate courses. So I took a pre-course survey. It's a very easy thing to set up. Just released it a week or so before the course started. It's entirely voluntary. Here's the thing, in every single year I've run it, it has always been well above 80% response rate. Now, undergraduate students will only engage in activity if they find value in it. So they clearly find value in this pre-course survey. It's designed to be an icebreaker. I introduce myself, give some personal details about myself, and then I ask a range of different questions for the students so I can get to know them as well. So what did I learn from these pre-course surveys? Well, first of all, these students are extremely busy. They have a lot of external work responsibilities that they're committed to. Some students are working effectively full-time outside the university while also being a full-time student on campus as well. How they manage it, I don't know, but this kind of starts to explain this kind of lack of engagement in examples of attending lecture, for example. A lot of the students are very anxious about something about their learning, and they also come from very diverse learning backgrounds. Over half of my students will self-identify as being anxious about something. A third of my students will identify that English is not their first language. Again, this will probably vary from institution to institution, but I suspect a large portion of your own students will also be coming from a non-English speaking background as well. Quite a few, roughly about 10% in every year, are self-identifying as neurodiverse, and they also have external carer responsibilities, an older family member that they might be looking after, or young children. So following up on why are these students so anxious and what are they anxious about, there's a question in this survey that highlights probably what you already suspect. The key thing is workload and time management. The course now is fully online and asynchronous, so it's up to them to do the work at their own pace, and they're worried about their own time management and committing to actually doing the work when they say they're going to be doing it. Third one is obviously that old chestnut of assessments. Everyone's worried about assessments. Engaging with peers. The online format can be quite intimidating, and background knowledge. Do I have enough to understand this course and do well in it? I also have a question that relates to, is there anything that you want to share that might impact your progress? And again, perhaps unsurprisingly, outside work. They're a bit worried that they suspect might actually impact their progress, but also care or responsibilities. A reasonable proportion of your students will identify some sort of mental health or neurodiverse aspect about themselves, sometimes physical health as well, back pain, so they can't be sitting down for long periods of time, which influences their learning as well. So all of this information together, it was supposed to be an icebreaker, right? I learned a lot about my students, and I do it every single year from this point. And the very first thing that became clear from this is that we need to figure out some way to create a supportive environment to reduce that anxiety, for example. So the solution that I came up with is a very simple one, and you've already seen it. It's this pre-course survey. You can create this through something like Microsoft Forms, but you can do it in all sorts of different ways. And you can do it on a smallish course, like this is a 60 to 80 student enrollment, but you could probably do this in something that's moderate size, like 150 or 200 students. If you're going to do it though, you are going to get students self-identifying about something, and you're going to have to action that. So I actually send an individual email to those students based on their responses in their survey, and usually it's just providing a little bit more information to reassure them about the workload and the time management, and a few tips about how to manage their own time and how to do really well in the course. And it's really supportive and really encouraging. You're going to do all right. You're going to do okay. Now, this strategy also helps you as an educator because it means that you get a big spreadsheet of all your students and who they are, and you can identify those students that might need a little bit extra help, keep track of them. If they start missing deadlines, then you can just do a quick personal check-in. Hey, how's it going? That's all it really needs to take. That all it needs to do. What happens is that because the students get that, they see that their progress is being tracked, they see that you care about their progress, and they will essentially start re-engaging with the course, essentially just to not let you down. So if they're not going to do it for themselves, they will end up doing it for you because you care about their progress in the course. It's almost this kind of smoke and mirrors sort of scenario, but it really does work. And how can I say that it works? So up on the screen here is the final percentage mark improvement on a student's WAM in my course. So WAM is essentially the average mark that they have gotten in all the other courses that they've taken at the university. You can see straight away that the students in my course do about 10% higher than they do in all the other courses, and the reasons why that's the case will come a little bit clearer in just a moment. For those students that have self-identified as being anxious, the start of using this kind of well-being support, just these kind of check-ins and personal emails, not to every single student, just the ones that kind of need it, really increase the commitment of those students, and it translates into their final marks. They increase their final mark in this course by, on average, or the median here, of about 5%. So it really does seem to be working. Achieving equity, the other aspect of what I discovered about my students is that a lot of them come from a non-English speaking background. Doesn't matter whether your university has kind of gates of English proficiency. Doesn't really matter how fluent you are in English, you're learning in a second language. That's a barrier straight up. Our accents can be a barrier, but introduce that plus technical terms and jargon. All of this turns into a barrier for comprehension for these students. Most of my students that are in this cohort are coming from China. So I thought, well, the first thing to start would be to try and address something that I can provide a little bit of extra language support for those students. I was able to leverage some funds from my university. This is back in the day. This is back in 21, I think it was, to pay a third-party company to provide English captions, but also foreign language subtitles, specifically for those Chinese students. And I just offered them as options to the students in the course on the course Moodle page, which is the learning platform that we use. And they could use it or they don't. It's entirely up to them. In a post-course survey, I asked the students, what did you rely on? What resources did you find that were particularly useful for you? So a third of the students self-reporting is coming from a background where English is not their first language, yet over half the students in my course across the years are relying on the English captions. They don't really care about the foreign language subtitles, which kind of makes sense. If English is not your first language, you want to keep learning English through hearing it, but also reading it at the same time, and it really reinforces that comprehension. But students who have English as their first language are using English captions heavily as well. And why are they doing this? They're reporting to me after the course because it helps improve their comprehension. They're reading text and they're listening to me in the video, and those two things help improve focus, but help improve comprehension as well, because they're getting that information in two different channels. For those foreign language students, the captions help spelling and identifying new words that they can then look up. Some students are actually using the captions because they're just accessing the videos in a context that's not appropriate to be able to hear the audio. So on the train or on the bus as they're coming to campus, at a cafe, they'll switch on the captions to make it easier for them to follow what the lecture is actually saying. Here's the thing that you can get with English captions, right? So back in the day I had to pay for this, but most of these platforms now have a default setting to create English captions for video. YouTube does it, Teams does it. You can do it actually in PowerPoint as well. You can download the transcript from those captions, free captions, and then you can scan that to see any technical or jargon that you might use. And then I've created a lecture-specific glossary for that lecture for those terms. I went a little over the top, across the entire course, across all the lectures, the glossary ended up being over 300 different terms and concepts. And it was a document that, if you put it all together, it would be about 16,000 words in length. So it was a little over the top. I thought I'd be lucky if half the students that identified as not having English as their first language might use it. When I surveyed the class, and this result is consistent from one year to the next, I've done this for 3 years now, over 3/4 of the class rely heavily on these glossaries. I mean, it's phenomenal. So they really do use it. Why? Because obviously they're using it to clarify unfamiliar terms, but often they're doing it to get more information on a topic they found particularly interesting, or they're getting more information to sort of elaborate on a concept that perhaps they didn't quite grasp during the lecture. Now, what you can now do, so this seems like a lot of work, but what you can now do is download that English caption transcript, feed it into an AI, ask it to identify jargon and technical terms, and then write a glossary for you. I mean, obviously, you'll need to go in there and just check that it's actually, coming up with sensible definitions, but you can do this very easily. Why would you want to do this? The only language support I've really provided here, other than the subtitles, of course, is the English captions on all the video content. So all the lectures are online, plus a lecture-specific glossary. Before I implemented those two things in 21, there was a large difference between students that had English as their first language and students that did not have English as their first language, a 10-point difference. And this was consistent in previous years to 21 as well. This is pretty consistent across different courses across the university sector as well. So this is pretty standard. Simply by providing captions and a glossary, I've improved the final grade for these students. They were hovering around about 75%, and they've jumped up to converge on those other students in the course, hovering around about 85 and getting into that kind of high distinction phase. Purely because I'm just using English captions and a glossary. That's it. But it seems to really work. Now let's get on to this old chestnut of maximizing engagement. This is the context of students just being disconnected from the course. If you're doing in-person lectures, they're not turning up to lectures. If you're giving them readings or a textbook, they're just not doing those readings. what can be the solution? Well, first of all, we need to identify what the problem is with these two delivery modes. Focusing on lectures, it is this notion of the model of the sage on the stage. It's teacher-centered, divulging information, and students are the vessel that just soak it up. And what they're actually doing is they're writing notes, they're memorizing those notes. They may do well on their final exam, but they're going to forget all that information within a couple of weeks. The alternative and the gold standard really is this guide on the side scenario. It's student-centered now, and it's active learning. Now, this is a classic example. This would be hands-on practicals, so doing. That is a classic example of active learning and student-centered learning. Is there a way that you can instill active learning into a delivery mode that's still reminiscent of a lecture? Before I get into that, having a look at my own lecture analytics, this is now online, this is not the in-person stuff. So I took the opportunity or mistake to have a look at the analytics in Echo 360 where we keep our lecture recordings. And I was horrified by what I saw. I thought I was doing pretty well. I thought I was providing engaging video lectures for my students, but even at the start of the course, only 2/3 of them would watch the entire lecture through to the end. By the last 3 lectures, I'd be lucky to get half of the students watching those lectures at all, right? So that is a massive disengagement. They're just not engaging with a pre-recorded traditional video lecture. And this is very reminiscent of what it's like in person as well. Students are just not turning up. The alternative that I created was to use the exact same content and then just change the delivery mode into this interactive video lectures. I'll get into the specifics of what that is in just a moment. So the blue dot on the screen here is the average view rate of those last 3 lectures in 21. That's traditional lectures hovering around about 40% of the students actually watching those. And then when I implemented this new interactive mode, from one year to the next, they're all hovering around about 80%. And that's the last 3 lectures, the really problematic ones where students are really kind of busy and stressed out and don't want to watch anything. So it really does seem to be working. What is it? Just simply breaking up your video content into smaller pieces. In my case, I use H5P because it's embedded in my learning platform of Moodle, but you can use YouTube to do some of this interactive video lectures. And the first method is pretty straightforward. It's what I call a lecture sandwich. It's a short video introducing a concept followed by an activity, another video, another activity, could be a quiz, and they're designed to reinforce the information that they've just watched through the short video. What does it kind of look like? Here's me discussing Nico Tinbergen's 4 questions and the approach to studying animal behaviour. I've just introduced those 4 questions, and then the student now has to engage with the learning platform, and in this case it's a simple drag and drop exercise of the 4 different things, and the students engaging in the content, they're reflecting what they've just heard, and then they can actually do this exercise, check whether they got it right. Some instances, if they don't get it right, they're a bit confused because the video before it was quite short. They then go back and rewatch it. They're more likely to do that. And this kind of reinforcement through these activities not only forces the student to engage, but it does instill this active learning component as well. The second, more complex version is a lecture choose your own adventure, where you've got these short videos and the student effectively follows the structure, but they get to choose the sequence of videos that they see. It works very effective if you're introducing a concept that can be presented as a problem-solving exercise, or a subject that's particularly controversial that has multiple viewpoints, and the student explores the different answers or viewpoints, selecting those options, goes to a new video that elaborates on those options, whether it's right, whether it's wrong, why is that the case, and the student moves through these the lectures as essentially a choose your own adventure, self-directed lecture. When I canvassed the students to ask them at the end, which ones did you prefer, they really definitely engaged more with the interactive lectures, particularly the lecture sandwich, because they liked the reinforcement of the activities. The self-directed versions of the interactive were also very popular, but some students were quite intimidated being put in the hot seat and having to direct their own learning, and having that agency can facilitate comprehension and reflection, but it can also be quite intimidating. They were, oh my God, I've got to make a decision here, and what if I get the wrong answer sort of scenario. So you do need to do a bit of a soft introduction for some of those students, just to ease them into that format. It's very new, and it's intimidating just because it's something that probably haven't experienced before. Why did they prefer these interactive lectures? Well, they found it vastly more engaging by a really large portion, which is specifically the way that things were designed. So that's to be expected and a definite plus. But it improved focus as well, because they're forced to engage. Better flexibility, as it turns out. Each of those activities were an actual stop point that allowed students to take a break and easy to come back to, and improve comprehension because it's active learning. And you can see there as well that the engagement in viewing those lectures is vastly higher than your traditional pre-recorded lecture as well. All right, so if you look into the literature, the key thing to get your students motivated is to establish the relevance of what you're teaching them. So, animal behaviour is relevant for so many different things: evolution, conservation, ecology. Instilling that with students will increase their engagement in the content. And one of the ways that I do this is I have created a series of video lectures from the field. These things are short, they're about 8 minutes to 15 minutes in length. They introduce a concept, I put it in a real world setting, but I also make the point of showing scientists actively studying that concept and how they go about studying that concept. These episodes, there are 8 in total. They're on different topics. What's the underlying genetics of behaviour? How do you study it? Contest behaviour or aggression, mate choice. All the core ones are covered in these video lectures. They're up on YouTube. They're free for you to use. I've also got multiple choice quizzes that are associated with them. If you want to have those as well, if they fit with what you need, I'm happy to share those. Just send me an email and I'll shoot them over to you. All right, over to this last chestnut, this kind of getting students to read and engage in text content. Many of you might be using textbooks. We stopped using textbooks a number of years ago, largely because students report textbooks as dense. They report them as boring. From an education perspective, they provide vastly too much information, unnecessary detail that distracts from the stuff that they really should be learning. And it also often lacks context. What is the context of this concept that they're learning? Also, they're just terribly expensive, right? So, is there a better alternative to a textbook or these kind of bland readings? I've created this graphic novel. It is an animal behaviour textbook. It covers 10 different chapters. Each of these are available as separate modules, so you can mix and match depending on what works with your course. And it's free, right? You can access it as a PDF. You can embed it in your course materials. The QR code here up on the screen will take you to the landing page for this graphic novel. Most of these chapters are now available. There will be an ebook and a paperback version of the complete work later on towards the end of the year, and you can get that through Amazon purely at cost, not at a profit. So it should be very affordable as well. Is this a gimmick? This is an authoritative work. This is a scholarly work. It is a real thing, and it's going to be something that's a viable replacement or a supplement to a textbook. The narrative style of a graphic novel reduces cognitive overload because it's got graphics plus text. They reinforce each other. There are natural stop points for reflection. We know reflection is really critical for active learning and retention. Students outside university are used to accessing visual-based short snippets of information online, and this kind of aligns with that same sort of delivery model. The other thing that the graphic novel does is it includes origin stories for the concepts themselves, but also the people who are studying those concepts and how they made those discoveries. We know that when students see people that kind of look like them and behave like them, they're likely to put more value in the information that they're being conveyed. So these kind of scientist stories and origin stories are peppered throughout the graphic novel. The narrative style of a graphic novel actually sits into what this kind of narrative yarn that's starting to gain traction in clinical medicine in terms of consulting with first peoples. This kind of cultural yarn as a clinical aspect of giving information is turning out to be really effective. It reduces communication barriers, subsequently improves comprehension. The graphic novel is essentially the same sort of narrative yarn, conveying sometimes quite complex information through that structure. It's fully sourced and based on the literature. It comes with a very detailed encyclopedia, essentially a glossary of concepts and terms, but also biographies for the scientists being featured as well. We're currently running a education research project right now, focusing on the very first preface, which is about how evolution works in nature. We're running it in a first year undergraduate course at UNSW. We've randomly assigned students to the traditional pre-recorded lecture, an interactive version of that same pre-recorded lecture, and a graphic novel which covers exactly the same content. So the only difference that occurs between these three treatments is the delivery mode. Students are giving a pre-course quiz just to establish their background knowledge. They then access the content and then revisit that quiz in a post-quiz to determine what their acquired new knowledge is. And in a couple of months' time, it's still ongoing, we're going to be surveying the students again in a final quiz to see how much information they retain. At this stage, the data is clearly showing that even if you just gave a volume of the graphic novel to a student, they learn just as much as they would from any other format, for example, a pre-recorded lecture. Because it's more active learning based, the interactive plus the graphic novel, we anticipate that there will be a better retention in a couple of months' time rather than the pre-recorded lecture. So, stay tuned for that. Okay, so having a look back at the relevance of behaviour and, where the next generation of our behavioural ecologists and ethologists coming from. Many of them are coming from our undergraduate animal behaviour courses. So, if you want to take a very kind of research-centred perspective on your academic career, your honours students and your PhD students are going to be recruited from your undergraduate teaching. So if you do really well in engaging those students right there, you're also more likely to get more students to help with, research as well. And so I'm not going to make too much of a deal about the data that I've got up on the screen here, other than to say that maybe, we should be thinking about where the next generation of behavioural ecologists are coming from. And with that, just return to the title slide and those two QR codes there. One will take you some teaching strategies that, may be inspire some of your own, and the free resources in terms of the graphic novel and the field lectures are also presented on that second QR code. And with that, thank you for watching.